All right, we'll call to order the City Council Workshop Meeting, Budget Discussion Number 2, agenda for Monday, August the 19th, 2024 at 6:33 p.m. Apologies for being a few minutes late. We had a little technical difficulties getting up and running on the live stream. With that, we'll move forward in the agenda. Roll call and certification of quorum. Madam Secretary, I'll certify we have a quorum present as all members of the council are present and in the chambers. With that, citizens' comments, we did not receive any prior to the meeting. So with that, we'll move to new business. Number 1, discussion regarding the fiscal year 2025 proposed budget. So before I turn it over to staff, obviously lots of work, lots of questions asked and answered of staff since the last meeting. I think there was, to go back and look at it, 60 some odd, 68 questions, something like that, and some in depth, which was very good information, made for some reading over the weekend, certainly. 65 questions. So tonight, council, we'll do the second part of the budget presentation and rollout. Both Trent and Victor will be doing that. And so I'm going to ask you as we move forward to tonight, if you want to see changes in the budget, those types of things, really now's the time to start having those conversations. Obviously, building consensus up here so staff will know kind of what to prepare. There's a topic later on. We do have the opportunity for a budget discussion next Monday night as part of our regular council meeting. So we'll decide whether or not we're going to do that. Really will be based on the conversation tonight. What I'm trying to head off or avoid as we get into, budget ordinance number 1 and number 2, and we have on-the-fly changes happening at the dais. We saw last week that dais math is not good math, and so we want to make sure that we have the opportunity to be accurate and be on it. Staff is here to run through any changes that somebody has and wants to look at, especially if we've got a consensus of council that wants to see some changes. So tonight would be the night to start asking for those or anything that you might have or thoughts over, as we, again, question all that we can, so we understand and know what every line item is or whatever the questions may be. But, there'll be a break point in the middle of the presentation tonight that we'll take some questions. So let's hold our questions until we get to that point, and we'll come back and address them. So with that, Trent, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. Welcome to our second FY25 budget discussion. We did provide you a handout just as we sat down here. I believe that replaces page 32 and 33 in your budget. And that's the sheet showing your funded supplementals by strategic priority. What we had there was a couple of the expenditures we're showing in the general fund column, and they should have been in the water and sewer fund column. I believe that's the only area that was a problem. The rest of the budget's got those in the right slots. So just wanted to mention that before we really get started. Moving in the presentation, as you may have noticed, our head of Office of Management and Budget, Rachel Winslow, is not here to lead us through this tonight. She was out of the office today, but she'll be back in tomorrow to lead us through the rest of the budget season. So unfortunately, or however you look at it, you get me and Victor as your main MCs tonight. So we'll try to make it through. So again, every time we talk about our budget, kind of want to kick it off with the budget theme, and that's planning for the future, preparing for any eventuality, and preserving the community. And we do that within the context of our strategic priorities, the associated milestones, the fundamental services that we provide, and always looking at our biggest expenditure and resources, which is our personnel. So in budget discussion 2, we're going to start off with a follow-up on all of the some of the discussion items from the discussion number 1 last week. We provided you a memo on Thursday, and as part of this budget packet, answering all the questions we had from last week's discussion, as well as any written questions that were submitted to us about the budget thus far. And so it'll seem a little bit random as we kind of jump through some of these slides, but they're just kind of bigger points from that initial discussion that we wanted to follow up on. Then we'll jump into a proposed additional retiree benefit that we want to take a look at. And then we'll walk through our internal service funds and our special revenue funds. And then we'll do a very brief recap of our capital improvement program, as we already had a workshop on that in June. We'll present the fee changes that we're recommending as part of this budget. And then we'll get to the kind of some decision points. If we haven't gotten good direction on those through the discussion, we'll stop and make sure we do have good direction on those. And then we'll walk through the future meetings that'll get us through the rest of our budget season. So as the mayor mentioned, these budget discussions are the time to provide input. Changes can and should be considered and made as part of the budget process. And then with the plan of once we head towards adoption, we want to have all those changes incorporated. So we'll kind of kick things off. We had a few questions about kind of comparing our number of employees with other cities. And so we've got those for our 4 largest departments, looking at that per 1,000 residents, and compared that to what we consider many of our peer cities. So every time we talk about this, I always want to kind of pause and talk about we have to be careful with these kind of metrics and how they're used and how we compare ourselves to others, because each city has its own nuances, and they're not always apples to apples to our structure and the services we provide. So kind of starting off with fire here, we're at about 1.4 versus the average of 1.6. You'll see a few of our peers we look at in a lot of other categories, like Friendswood, League City, and Pasadena, not on this list, as they are largely volunteer fire departments, and therefore haven't included them here. And then there's other departments like Missouri City that don't provide EMS services. So that's some of those nuances in there that we have to look at to try to compare apples to apples. And then, of course, on the PD, you see us there at 2.0 and the average about 2.29. And then on Public Works and Utilities, we combine those for the purposes of this. We're at about 1.7 with the average at about 1.87. Again, there's lots of different services provided by different cities. So you take a look at like Missouri City, Frisco, and Friendswood. They either don't run their own utilities or they don't run some portion of their utility systems. So there's a difference there. Some cities also run their solid waste. Some cities have landfills, but somebody else runs their solid waste. So lots of nuances. And then for parks, we're at 0.8 with 0.76 the average. But again, parks is an area that's very difficult to compare because most cities don't have natatoriums or sizable rec centers, but some have other things that we don't have. Like some of them have golf courses, but they may be run out of an enterprise fund, so you never even see the employees show up in that. So kind of in summaries, these provide some insight, but they're not a full picture without delving into a lot of those details. The next item we're following up on is there were questions about what it looked like if we added to the proposed pay plan either 1 or 2% of that. So just to kind of set the baseline, the current average pay increase with the proposed pay plan that's in the recommended budget for PD is about 7%, fire about 10%, and other departments across the city about 5%. The police and fire were based on a pretty extensive market survey of our peer cities and getting us at the average of those. The other departments we didn't do as an extensive look this year as we did for those two, and we're looking to do that more extensive look next year. But you take the starting point with those, and if you were to add 1% to each of those pay plans, in the general fund, it would cost an additional $850,000. Citywide, when you add in the other funds, just over $1 million, and then the 2%, you see that as well, 1.7 and just over $2 million. And then the next item is that we want to provide the corrected tax bill sample for Brazoria County. We had a mathematical mistake in this one that got picked up during the presentation last week. So what you do see here is we are about, while a little bit smaller percentage than last year, still at about 34.3% of that overall tax bill. And then we were asked to provide a tax bill sample with a MUD and our Alvin School District instead of the Pearland School District. And you can see once you take a look at those being part of the equation, we're at about 26% of the overall tax bill. So the next item we wanted to revisit and cover is our street recapitalization or pavement condition index. And really, I think what I wanted to do here was put like a larger perspective on our street recapitalization program and how we positively impact our pavement condition index by looking at all of our resources that go into our street network. So, you know, it starts with our streets crews. We have one of those right now. They mostly, for the most part, they're doing pothole patching and minor repairs. It's and when we get into, you know, wet periods or very dry periods, very difficult for them to keep up, having just the one crew. And so that's part of our proposed budget, is to add that second crew for preventative maintenance and to help out when we're getting behind on repairs to roadways. So that is part of the recommended budget. The next place is our infrastructure fund. So this is basically the general fund that gets transferred into the infrastructure fund for streets as well as sidewalks. This is the money we use to fund our interlocal with Brazoria County to buy the materials for that. And then we also do our own contracted asphalt pavement rehabilitation through that fund. And then this past year in late '24 with budget amendment number 2, we allocated $3 million of capital funds into a street rehabilitation program in the CIP. And then we've got another 1.3 proposed in 2025 to kind of bolster and help out and get us caught up on some of these things, since we haven't been able to add over the years into the infrastructure fund. And we'll see the first contract coming out of that actually at next Monday's meeting. That's scheduled to be awarded. And that'll be just under $3 million based on that budget amendment in fiscal year '24 to contract out additional asphalt pavement rehabilitation. And then we also have our capital improvement program. So that includes kind of 2 areas where we impact the streets. One is with our large 2023 drainage program. A lot of those drainage projects, we know when we go in those neighborhoods, we're gonna tear up the street network, improving the drainage. So part of those projects we include is to reconstruct or rehabilitate those roads before we leave those neighborhoods. So that's built into the drainage program. And then we also have a streets bond program where we reconstruct streets through that as well. And then a lot of these things are also tied into how we leverage outside funds for our street network, either through the PEDC, federal funds, state funds, and partnerships with the county as well. So, you know, all of these things are the different things that go into how we can impact our PCI and what our infrastructure fund needs are. So while we need to continue to look at the infrastructure fund and try to increase that year over year from the general fund, we have allocated additional funds to this need for '24 and '25. And one of the things is looking at how we can absorb that within the division, streets division that runs that, and taking a look at how we absorb those additional dollars in there. And if we continue to add more, do we need more personnel to manage those additional dollars? And then, so just to kind of conclude on that, one of the things we want to do is at the next CIP update series, where we discuss and are focused on streets, we want to kind of back off from just looking at that streets program and really what we just went through, take a look at that comprehensive look of all those different tools and what that means for our PCI and our infrastructure funds long term. I think about it from kind of this standpoint. We've got some major thoroughfares and secondary thoroughfares that are still the old county asphalt streets. Those are the ones we all hear about all the time, and we got a lot of we struggle to keep up with on the potholes and things like that. Those streets really need to be converted to concrete curb and gutter through a bond program, and then they no longer are the immediate need from an asphalt street rehabilitation standpoint. And eventually we'll get that down to more just neighborhood streets and collectors, much easier to manage, carry less traffic long term. But at the same time, as our concrete infrastructure ages, we'll have to start putting additional and more dollars into that as well. So it doesn't, the need doesn't go away. The need will continue to grow. It's just where does it need to go to? So Did want to just kind of summarize what we are putting in there and how that we are going to make a bigger impact this next year, although it's not through the infrastructure fund. Next item I wanted to talk through is the water sewer rate model. So we had some discussion last time about what the recommended rate is, and I think we all saw that based on the model, there is some leeway to maybe bring that rate down a little bit. But did want to kind of walk through how we got from last year's rate model to this year, because there is a fairly big difference in what was projected and where we are today. So there's kind of four main factors in that. One of them deals with the bond coverage ratio requirement. We previously issued revenue bonds, which now those revenue bonds, when they were issued, always required a 1.4 coverage ratio. Now that we still carry those until they're paid off, we have this 1.15 ratio that we have to carry. The COs, when we made that switch to COs, those actually do not require bond coverage. So what we'll see is a declining amount of funds that have to be set aside every year for that bond coverage. And what we did, so a couple things is the model was still reflecting that you carried that 1.15 for all things. That was our understanding at the time, but we just got that clarified through bond counsel and through our financial advisors that we don't have that coverage requirement for the COs. So we updated the model to reflect that, and really now see the full positive impacts that go into COs for our water sewer projects with those changes. The next item's the drought from last summer. That, of course, we always plan for in our rate model and our budgets for water and sewer is that we look at an average usage, whether there's between dry and wet years, and project for some growth. But with the pretty extensive drought from last summer, that drove our revenues much higher than they were originally modeled. So that impacted this year as well. Then we had the mud rebate reduction, so that now we've got that built into the model. And then we did make some, not huge, but some substantial 5-year CIP modifications where we looked at several projects, kind of reevaluated the timing on those. With the large projects wrapping up with JHEC and the surface water treatment plant and kicking off the Berry Rose plant, looked at what we could slide out of the 5-year to reduce those impacts over the years 3 through 5 of the CIP. So the results of that were some pretty big movers in the model itself. So the first grouping here is what we proposed in the 25 budget, and the purpose behind the recommended in the budget is it's the smoothest. The rates don't jump around, and kind of the lowest if you combine them year over year for the years 25 through 29. So then we ran 3 more scenarios. The first scenario you see here on this slide is keeping a 6% growth rate in 25 and 26, and then smoothing the rates out for 27, 28, 29. So you can see in that scenario in 27, we're getting down to the bare minimum on our reserve requirement, and then at the bare minimum on 28 and 29. Next scenario would be pull things down to a 3% rate growth for 25, and then smoothing the rates out for 26 through 29. So you can see again, we kind of hit that minimum in 27 and stay there moving forward. And then the last scenario, we said, hey, let's just run this thing and say, what's the lowest we can run this down every year? And this is where things really jump around. So we could run down to a 0 this year. And then what that does, though, is that 2 years from now, we're looking at a 31% rate increase to keep that minimum reserve requirement at 15. So just wanted to show that, not recommending that, but wanted to show that. And it kind of goes back to what we've talked about through many of these meetings is when you artificially push that rate down and you don't consider that costs are increasing for materials, for supplies, for chemicals and personnel to operate our system. When we hold that down artificially or unnecessarily, the impacts kind of compound over time. So all these scenarios, just to let you know, there is some ability to take a look at this and where we end up this year. All right, so at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Matt, and he's going to cover a couple things with the PEDC that we're going to follow up on.
Thank you, Trent. Good evening, Mayor and Council. The first slide here, we just have what the code requires for Type B corporations, which the PEDC is a Type B corporation to collect sales tax. At our last meeting, we talked about the requirement to have bonds, but you'll notice it also says or other obligations there under number 1. And I think we've done some research here in the last few days, and I think we have a wider interpretation of that. So we think as long as the EDC has loan agreements or reimbursement agreements with the city, which we always do have, that we would be able to continue to collect the sales tax under those other obligations. So our last bond payment right now is in September of 2026. But based on cash flow, we would expect, as you'll see on the next slide, by FY26, we would still need to issue debt. So what we originally forecast, the 5-year forecast that we went over with you last week, we had 4.7 in 2025, and then 6 in 26, and 12 in 27. And so we just switched that revised forecast, you'll see there on the bottom line, to 6 in 26, and then 15.5. And the 15.5 is the combination of the 12 and a little bit of what we would have issued in 25. All of the 6 and 12 you see there, that's the 18. That is all for the utilities for the 518 relocation project. And then on the next slide, just shows you kind of what the cash flow is there, and you can see it gets pretty tight in FY27 with our ending fund balance of about almost 1.8 million, and that would be right at our 10% stated policy of keeping a fund balance of 10% of sales tax. And then obviously there could be other projects that come in the interim that we might need to issue debt, or some of the projects that we're proposing might not come to fruition, and then we would maybe issue less debt or be able to push debt back.
Thank you, Matt. So one of my goals was to deliver the council a no new revenue option as part of the annual budget process. So when we delivered your budget, we also delivered in there a memo attached to it that did that. So kind of before we jump into that, just want to kind of cover what is the no new revenue rate. It's the tax rate that produces the same amount of tax dollars or revenue from the same properties as the prior year. And then, what that does not accommodate for is any inflation or growth or unfunded mandates or any new initiatives or programs that the council wishes to move forward with that would support our strategic priorities. So kind of the way I look at that is it's really similar to asking a business to absorb inflation on their goods, materials, supplies, and labor while not allowing any revenue growth through price increases from the same customer base. That's kind of what the no new revenue rate is asking us to do. So with that, we did deliver the no new revenue rate option. No new revenue rate was just shy of 60 cents, 59.9536. And so that basically results in a net revenue reduction of $5 million in the general fund. And that's comprised of a reduction in the property taxes of 4.8, and then a reduction in the TERS administration fee, 1.4. And then because we would have a lower overall budget, we would have a lower fund balance requirement by 1.2. So you net that out, and it's $5 million. So to get there, you would have to reduce our expenses by the same amount. And these are just a few of the things that are in this current budget that potentially could make that up. But we're not recommending this, but those are just some of the areas where you could arrive at the $5 million reduction, among other. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Lorraine, and she is going to walk us through a retiree benefit proposal that's been discussed and we've reviewed and analyzed and want to propose and discuss with you. So all yours, Lorraine.
Thank you, Mr. Epperson. Good evening, Mayor and Council. So with that in mind, we're going to review the retiree benefit proposal that we've been reviewing for the past few months. So for those of you who weren't here in the past, we currently have a retiree benefit that was adopted back on October 1st of 2018 for long tenured staff. And it was to incentivize long tenured employees to stay with the organization and not result in early departures, causing what we would call the silver tsunami. And so the goal was to retain skilled workforce by offering medical benefits subsidy for those employees who are age 60 to 64.99 with a minimum of 15 to 20 years of service. And then once they reach age 65, the staff member become eligible for Medicare and they would drop off of our retirement benefit at that point. So the purpose and the intention behind it was to create a true retiree benefit for those who were not planning to pursue full-time employment elsewhere. So with that in mind, this is the current structure with regards to our retiree plan. And so it is tiered based upon years of service with the organization. And so for those who reach the minimum age of 60 with 20 plus years of service are eligible to receive 100% subsidy. And then for those who are within the same age bracket with 15 to 19.99 years are eligible to receive a 50% subsidy. And so with the 60-20 plan, the impact of it aligns with our current TMRS retiree structure and schedule. And with this structure, the benefit maximum that we are responsible for as an organization is up to 5 years for an employee who may retire from our organization. And with this structure, the cost for FY24 is about $1,000 per month per employee who has retired from the organization, or is approximately $66,000 with 2% inflation over a 5-year period. And so since the inception of this ordinance, we had about 15 retirees flow through this process, which is a sponsored plan. And then as of October 1 of last year, we have 5 retirees who received the city paid benefits. 2 were in the police department, 2 in EPW, and 1 within the fire department. And so when you look at the age and service distribution of who is eligible to retire, when you look at the green bar, it acknowledges that 3 employees are currently eligible for the 100% subsidy on the Kelsey 80 plan. And if we were to move over to the rule of 80, then 10 additional employees will be eligible for this benefit. Under the rule of 80, currently 7 additional employees will be eligible for the full or partial subsidy. And then in the navy blue, 2 employees, if we explored the 5530 plan, will require additional 5 employees to be eligible after 5 years. And with regards to the rule of 80, within 5 years, there will be an additional 37 employees who will be eligible for a subsidy under the rule of 80 versus 14 under our current 60-20 plan. And so when you look at these numbers, you may seem a little shocked by it, but please don't be, because just because someone is eligible for retirement doesn't necessarily mean they're going to retire. And so when offering the retirement medical benefits, there are some advantages to offering this to our employees. It helps the city to attract top talent, retain experienced employees, and enhance the employee satisfaction and loyalty to our organization. It also provides flexibility for a smoother transition for the city and departments, improving workforce planning for the city. In particular, public safety personnel face significant physical and mental challenges due to the high-stress nature of their duties. Offering retirement benefits to personnel promotes health and well-being, reduces burnout, and ensures public safety by addressing the limitations that can arise with aging officers. Departments can honor the tenure of their staff while supporting organizational renewal and financial stability through cost savings. So how will we fund this benefit? The proposed public safety plan will be offset by a 2-to-1 ratio. The difference between the salary of a maxed out police officer and that of a newly hired officer is enough to cover the cost of 2 retirees. So it is a net neutral, and all other plans will result in a similar funding. So the value proposition of this benefit is that it places the city on par with the state of Texas retirement benefits. Prospective employees will view this as a strong incentive to join the city of Pearland and to remain with us for a very long time, thus improving our recruitment efforts. So here are our options. Under our current plan, which is our 60-20 plan, it was designed to retain key talent, and it aligns with our TMRS structure. And a maximum benefit is up to 5 years. The cost of this benefit is about $66,000 for 5 years for one employee. If we move forward with the 5530, it rewards long tenured staff. It increases the benefit maximum from 5, actually up to 10 if they retire at the age of 55. And this will be an additional cost of $72,000 for 10 years per employee. And if we decide to move with the rule of 80, staff are eligible to retire at a faster rate and can maintain medical benefits up to 16 years if someone were hired at the age of 18 and then retire at 49 with 31 years of service. This would be an additional up to $171,000 for 16 years for that specific employee. And so with regards to the proposed updates, we want to look at revising the ordinance we currently have in place to make some slight changes to it. We want to make sure we require an annual affidavit for retirees who are on this plan, and reminding them that engaging in another full-time position will result in forfeiture of this actual retiree benefit. And then we have to include language around that the benefit subsidy is for the employee only. And then retirees cannot temporarily suspend their coverage to pursue alternative employment and resume their retirement benefits later. Thank you.
So we'll pause here. I know that's a lot. We covered a lot of things from first go around and lots of other things to this point. And so we'll pause here and entertain any questions or discussion around any of the items thus far. Thank you.
All right, we'll open it up for questions, comments from council. Ms. Chavarria, go to you first.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you so much for the presentation. So if you go back to slide 8, I just have a question regarding the PCI. I want to make sure I'm understanding. So the infrastructure allocated for 25 is 1.3, and then you're recommending a street rehabilitation program of 1.3 for fiscal year 25. So is that 2.6 that we're looking at allocating for fiscal year 25?
That's correct.
So we are still short like 3.3 on the recommendation of the PCI?
Ballpark, yes.
Yeah, okay. So
And the 3 million we allocated in 24, we just did that. So we're just
yeah, so for the
starting to spend
24,
those
which is this
dollars,
fiscal year, correct? Okay.
It is, but that'll be spent from basically next week forward. You know, it'll go into part of next year as well.
Well, because I guess I'm just trying to get out, how do we get to that shortfall? And my other question that I have is, how can we utilize Parkland funds? Because I can see $900,000 for the park, which is a South Down Park, being reallocated to EDC, because then they can do future maintenance on that park, and then alleviating that $900,000 for the budget to go into general fund. So I'm just trying to figure out how we can do that, or how we can get there.
So we can't move parkland dedication funds over into the general fund. And then maybe Carrie can cover what the uses of those are.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Council. The parkland dedication funds can be utilized for planning purposes, so to create design plans for parks or even park master plans. They can also be utilized for construction of new parks, land acquisition, or recapitalization of existing park space.
So no operational expenditures.
No.
Carrie, real quick, you might explain where the parkland dedication funds come from.
So parkland dedication funds are collected through new development. As new development comes into the city, years ago, the city established the Parkland Dedication Ordinance, which requires the developers that are building new rooftops to pay parkland dedication fees. And the reason behind that is because with each new rooftop brings new residents into the community. And those new residents will will create a greater demand on our park system. And so rather than putting that burden on our existing taxpayers, that burden is collected upfront as those new residents are moving into our community.
So it's earmarked, it's for a specific, it's dedicated funds. Yeah, restricted.
So while we're talking about that, so can it be used for administrative salaries, nothing like that?
No, it cannot.
Okay.
So the recapitalization of Southdown Park is a perfect use, for some of those dollars.
That's correct.
Correct.
So So I think what Mona was really starting the conversation with was our streets and getting some more money into our streets. And if we're here to offer, our input on that, I would put my input on that we need to definitely put some more money into our streets and sidewalks program. Trent, like I told you before, I'm not here to micromanage you. I'm not going to study this book for 2 weeks and be able to tell you how to handle it. I mean, I think that you can run that by everyone, and you'll probably get a consensus on that. I mean, I can make suggestions, and the only reason I'm bringing this up is because she was talking about parks, and I know one of our biggest jumps is in our parks fund. We're looking at hiring 68 people, and our fund is going up like $1 million. Am I reading that wrong, or?
No, we're not hiring 68 people.
So, page 35, Parks and Recreation total proposed. And then if I go, it says 68.4, and then if I go to 219, the 24 projected is 1.6 million, and the 25 budgeted is 2.6 million. And that's page 219.
So the first one was on 35?
Well, that was just the personnel changes, yes.
Yeah, so that is the total number of personnel there. And then
What's the 107?
so the left side is FTEs, the right side deals with part-time employees, and so there's like an equivalency that's used. Park uses a significant number of part-time employees for like lifeguards and recreation center attendants and ball field attendants and things like that. So basically we take those part-time hours and equate those to full-time equivalents. But the only areas we're adding any place in parks is in those areas, those part-time areas, and those are really covered by the ball field lease fees. And then the other area we're adding is to do the other summer camps, and the summer camps completely 100% cost recover. So we're not adding any personnel that's not paid for in parks. And then what was the other page?
Page 219. The 24 projected and the 25 budgeted on administration. In the right column would say 61.8%.
So this is where we're going to miss Rachel. But we can definitely get an answer back out this week on what that is comprised of.
Yeah, because it's a large jump in numbers, and then it says administration, which kind of adds up to the personnel changes, I thought, but could be wrong. But again, I think the basis.
Carrie may be able to help us out here. I know we discussed this. I just can't remember the basis of it.
So you were correct in the number of positions that we were requesting. Those are just the part-time positions for athletic field attendants and for our summer camp staff. That increase in admin might be for the transfers out for the facilities internal service fund.
That's correct. So, as we stood up our internal service funds for facilities and IT, in the previous years, we hadn't done all the transfers out as part of the budget. So when we do that, we budget for those in the departments that utilize that service, and then we transfer those funds, in this case, over to the internal service fund for facilities. Because Parks operates the Senior Center, West Pearland Event Center, as well as the Recreation and Natatorium, they have a large chunk of our facilities. And so when we finally put those dollars into the Parks Department and then those get transferred out into facilities to maintain those facilities, that's why there's a big jump year over year there.
That also includes our IT internal service funds.
Correct. So that's a change. It's a really kind of a change in practice year over year. It was always the intention as we moved into those internal service funds, and this is the first year we've done that.
I'm not sure, does Parks have leased vehicles as well? Not leased to the city, but where we're paying leases on So
They do, yeah, those would have been in previous budgets, but we can have the budget team, detail that out in the response memo this week. But
Okay, I'd appreciate that. And
Absolutely.
again, like I said, I'm not here to micromanage you. It's just I think you're asking us for some direction, and I mean my input would be getting some more money on the streets, whatever avenue that you choose or your team.
And I think what we always want, I think the long-term plan is we add to that year over year until we get there. I think where the pressures on the budget ended up this year from a pay plan standpoint is that, and because we had allocated this basically $4.3 million that they have to spend over this next year as well, that before, increasing that 1.3 in the infrastructure fund, let's work through this year, because we're really going, we're asking that team that has had the 1 to 1.5 every year to spend, we're all of a sudden asking them to spend the 1.3 plus 4.3. So we're asking them to spend $5.6 million over the next year when their normal program and course of what they do is 1.3. So I think let's let them work through that process, get that out the door, make sure we get that out the door well, and then continue to try to add to that infrastructure fund in the future and grow into that larger number on a permanent basis.
I was going to back that up just a little bit, because I get hit for street maintenance all the time as well, and so until I really had the opportunity to understand the different buckets of money where street rehab and repair are actually in the budget, and then you start adding it up, there's significant dollars here. And if you look at over the next 5 years, PEDC alone, outside funds leveraged, the EDC alone, 20% of their budget, there's some $22 million there that's going in, recapitalization of older street areas, there. And then in the drainage bond fund, I've asked staff on this slide specifically, and we have some type of whether it's a map or a program that has layering on it, so you can see here's where street crews are working, here's where we're going to do the interlocal agreement with Brazoria County, layer that in, here's where the street rehab program is going to go, and then here, if we have some document like that, because again, we get asked these questions all the time, and unlike staff who's in it, and the streets crews and everybody else that are in it every day, they can just rattle it off and tell you where it is. I'd rather have something that I can go by and say, here's where it's coming from. Each one of those drainage bond projects, I'll give you an example. In the drainage bond, Harkey Road is one that we notoriously get hit up with every time it rains. I mean, that street is scheduled to be completely changed into concrete curb and gutter as a part of a drainage bond program. So that's one, for example, that will be changed that way. So I don't know the timing of getting something like that. I know Eric and his folks have the data and where all that dollar is going, but putting it into something that we can dumb it down for us where we can see it.
Yeah, I don't want to overpromise, but my understanding is that they've got that built into our GIS, and we can produce something fairly quickly.
So if we've come in next Monday night as part of that item, it might be good to see it there in context. And again, if you just add up EDC and probably what's in the drainage bond plus what you see here, there's probably north of $40 million being used in roadway and roadway rehab over the next 5 years. So that's a chunk of money. And again, to Trent's point, making sure that we have the people internally to manage it. Obviously, the CIP is all managed through projects anyway. EDC is going to be their own project managers doing it. So we'll have people to manage that. But I think it'll make sense if we see it on a map, because we know internally what roads we think of every time that we get the phone call about it, and we'll probably see that. So I just wanted to jump in and add some color to that. Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sticking with the theme, as you said when we started out, good to get consensus. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to beat the dead horse a little bit just so you have consensus, or at least you get a sense of it. But I would agree that moving forward, I understand this, and I appreciate breaking it down. I would like to see how much of the streets, how much of the drainage bond affects both drainage and streets in 25, so we have a general idea of what we're actually spending on roads in 25 in total. I like the 20% from the EDC, but that really only affects more business-related roads, not necessarily the roads that everyday citizens are traveling and yelling at us about on a daily basis. So that's good that we're doing it, because roads are still part of our PCI. Right. It still needs to be done. But being able to show kind of the difference there, and then moving forward, probably in our February strategic planning, more of a focus on that infrastructure fund, because we won't necessarily have this 3 million and this 1.3 every year. This is kind of a one-off. Am I correct on that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this helps us move forward for FY25, gives us some time to start working on building that infrastructure fund in 26, right? And that is kind of where you were headed in your recommendation as well.
That's correct. Yes, sir.
So yeah, I wanted to add that and I'll ask council before I ask a different question. Do we need to keep talking about streets, or can I ask a different question? Because somebody's got more about streets, might as well stay here.
I think Member Koza last meeting, you had proposed the idea of maybe increasing the EDC from 20 to 25%. And I think I would be in support of that if staff is looking for directions. Obviously, Mona and Chad both are in favor of increasing that budget. So if there is an appetite with this council to maybe push EDC, and it looks like Matt is shaking his head to go sell some bonds in 2026, maybe we can sell these bonds to fix some of our roads and expedite some of these, the roads that we can. I understand we can't do all of them. Neighborhoods and all those are all off table. But at least some of these other roads that are travel and business oriented, maybe we can kind of get that going.
So I've had some discussions with Matt since our last meeting as far as the 25%. So Matt, if you would like to kind of share our discussions.
Yes, so our budget right now includes 25%. The resolution between the board and the councils, the agreement would be a minimum of 20%. And our budget right now includes 25% with the projects we have. So we're already doing it. I think Member Thuman alluded to that, but I didn't catch what he was saying. But yeah, the budget we proposed, the budget's in our 5-year forecast, is 25% of our sales tax revenue.
Now, to move on past that, our agreement with EDC was 20%. So moving forward, if we want to do something to move it to 25, where it's in writing, we could go back through that process again, so that we would move the needle or bar, or whatever you want to say, from 20 to 25, and pick that up if you wanted to do something like that at a future date.
I would certainly ask council to consider that, and maybe if we don't have some of these larger projects that come to fruition, maybe we can start looking at more of those projects that we can fund with infrastructure with those funds.
And Trent and I have had some conversations as far as, and here again, things that they've done recently won't need attention for 40 years, 30 years, something like that. But anything they've touched in previous years, we would be able to go back and look at as far as things that have, transpired before we came around.
Mr. Brown, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If we can go to slide 70 in the presentation, which I think is slide number 7. No, not slide. Yeah, page 70 of the presentation, slide 7. Yeah, here. Okay, so this first column, that's what's proposed within the current budget proposal, correct?
Yes.
So the slide 5, 2 up from that is number of employees per resident for fire and police, and compared to these different cities. Is this the same list of cities that we compared this compensation plan to, or is that a different list?
So I believe the fire list is going to be pretty comparable. The police list, we changed in working with PPOA, we all agreed on a list of cities that was much more close to us and our typical competition when we are looking to hire officers. So I believe that was this list has more than that. So I believe that list was Sugar Land, Pasadena, Missouri City, League City, Baytown, and that may be it. There was 6 of them. So this does include a few others. Webster was the other one. So
Okay.
this does have a few others.
So going back to slide 7, and if we could have that list that we actually compared our public safety people to, I would appreciate having that information. So
You
this
want the per 1,000 versus just those?
no the on the compensation plan, not the number of officers we have per 1,000 residents, but the cities we compared our compensation plans to.
Right. So that was in the compensation memo that came out, what, a couple of weeks ago prior to the first budget meeting.
You'll have to forgive me. You've
No, lots of information, but we can reshare that out as well.
I'll go find it if I already got it somewhere. I just must have missed it. But so back to this slide. So that far left column, that puts us on average out of that number of cities. I think you may have listed off 10, so that would put us at roughly number 5 out of those 10. Is that what I'm seeing?
From a pay plan standpoint?
Yes, sir.
It would actually be the 6 that we actually compared to. It would put us right at the average of those 6 that's in that memo.
Okay, so it was 6 of them.
Right. So, and one of the things I think we have to, when we talk about things like this, we have to put the big picture around it. What are the other things that we do, from a training standpoint, what do we put into that? How does that benefit us to recruit? What's the culture in our organization? And just the entire benefits package. And then also looking at, what do we lose people to? Are we losing them to other organizations? Not typically once they've started working here. And I think we do we're in a good place when we are recruiting based on the total package we provide. It's not that I'd love to take our whole pay plan and we've got great people and say, hey, we need to be in the 75th percentile, but there's also, reality of where, what we can generate from a revenue standpoint and do that.
Yeah, no, I definitely understand that. And I know that pay is one-dimensional out of a multi-dimensional situation. And it may just simply be that maybe Chief, you and I can sit down offline and really kind of explain this whole process, or Trent, to me a little bit better. Because as we're talking about setting priorities or giving direction, I do believe that we have the best police and fire in the state of Texas, and anything that we can do that can show that to them every way that we can, I would be in favor of doing that. But I do understand it's not apples to apples across the board, and there's differences. So maybe I just need a little more time to understand how we got here and how we move forward. But that would be an area that I would be in favor of increasing if we had the opportunity to. Granted, we have challenges in every single department across the entire city. And I think we all understand that, but that would be an area I would want to look at as well. I'll have more questions. Just let me find them.
Yeah, as we go through. Mayor Pro Tem?
All right, thank you, Mayor. If you go to slide 12 and 13, I guess the water rates. So 12 up top, you got proposed. If you go to 13, scenario 2 and 3, not in favor of those.
Yep.
So if you go back to slide 12, I could be talked into scenario 1. Yep. Or splitting the baby at 7%. I mean, you're predicting the weather. So I don't know if there's consensus, but that's where I'm at. But I guess thank you, staff, for putting that together. I think that shows what a tweak here or there does in the long term.
Real quick, before moving on these slides,
Yeah.
quick question just to throw out there. I was going to ask, what inflation rate did we see in the out years in that? Because obviously there's inflation and those types of things built into the out years. And just asking, are we anticipating kind of back to normal, 4 or 5%, or are we still looking at 6, 8, 9? I'm not sure what was put into the rate model in the out years.
So we can take a look at that.
So that's going to have a factor.
We can take a look at that and provide that as part of the follow-up.
I didn't mean to, since we were talking about that slide.
No, that's good. I don't know if you want to stop now and see if there's a consensus.
I can tell you, I would agree with going to 7% across the board, as you said, between scenario proposed in one.
It'd be 7. I'm not sure what it would do in 27, 28. It should flatten it. I mean, if we go from 6 to 7, it should pop those down a point. So I'm like you. I like either proposed or scenario 1 with a tweak. The other two, I just don't like those spikes that are there, and those spikes are so far out. They're anybody's guesses, really.
I would agree with that.
7?
I agree.
I agree.
I think we look at it at 7, bring that back, and see what that, make sure that where we're at. But, yeah.
All right. If you go to slide 15, 16, we've talked about this a lot back when I think Mona and Tuman were on the EDC, and we couldn't pay off the debt. And I guess the legal opinion at that time is we had to have bonds. And now we dug in some more and we don't. Any more clarity or color you want to add to that? I guess Matt or Darren or Lawrence?
Councilmember Carbone, what specifically would you like to know about? Would you just like some color on that, or?
Yeah, I mean, if you go back and watch the meetings, was it 18? When we tried to pay all the debt off, everybody was hell bent that we can't pay all the debt off, and now it sounds like that opinion's changed.
Correct. So, as you know, that Bond Counsel in the past has instructed that Section 505.258 that's referenced here would require the EDC to always have some level of debt, or if it does pay it off within a certain amount of time, you have a narrow window in order to issue more debt so that you can continue to collect sales tax. And that's been sort of the practice. And there's actually, when you look at 505.258, there's a conservative approach to that. That some individuals and some attorneys may take, and then there's a different approach, and I wouldn't call it a liberal approach. I think it's going to be probably taking more of a literal approach to it. And when you look at the language there, specifically, it says a sales and use tax imposed under this chapter may not be collected after a certain period. And then when you get to Section 1, it says, after there's been notification of the comptroller that all bonds or other obligations of the corporation that are payable wholly from the sales tax revenue have been paid off and no longer exist. So the key is all bonds and other obligations. Well, a narrow interpretation of this would look at this entire section to apply just to bonds, bonded indebtedness. But words have meanings, obviously, and as you can see, it says all bonds or other obligations. So what does other obligations mean? So I did have a conversation with an individual. He's a partner in a law firm who represents about 14, 15 different EDCs around the state. And the reason I reached out to him, because he has quite extensive experience, but he also wrote this law. He's the author of it. And so I wanted to find out a little bit more about that. And just so you'll know, the origin of this law was actually when the ballpark at Arlington was first constructed. The ballpark at Arlington, and I'm not referring to their current ballpark. This is the one that they recently left to go into their newer ballpark. But when they did this, there was a concern that you have bonded indebtedness, and then all of a sudden you could end up, those debts don't get honored. You could terminate, Economic Development Corporation or something, or they no longer are issuing debt, and then the next thing you know, bondholders are left, wait, what about paying off your obligations? This says, no, all bonded indebtedness has to be paid, and other obligations. So what does that mean? Well, the other obligations was added into that because there are some EDCs that operate and they never issue debt, but they still continue to collect. And the reason that they don't issue debt is because they have operating revenues from their sales tax that they can enter into other obligations. Examples of other obligations would be, for instance, when many of the EDC prospects that we enter into agreements with, and out in the lower Kirby area, even on this side of town, many of those we end up entering into commitments. So when I had the conversation with this individual, I said, well, there's not a real clear definition of other obligations. And he says, well, you have to go backwards to get there. And so if you go to section 501022, which is the definition section of the economic development statutes, there's a definition of bonds. So you have to actually look at the definition of bonds. And bonds are not just what we think of as bonds. Bonds are indebtedness. Any indebtedness that could include bonds or other notes. But it's a form of indebtedness. And so when the EDC enters into obligations that make them indebted to prospects out there, because the prospect, as you know, commits to build improvements, create jobs, and when they do that, the EDC incurs obligations that they owe them. And so one final note on that. What that means is that an EDC can't issue debt if they have no obligation. But as long as you have those obligations, they can continue to collect sales tax as long as they have ongoing obligations. And the reason for that is that the Attorney General believes because you've incurred those obligations, you must continue to collect your sales tax so that you can pay off those obligations. Hopefully that makes some level of sense. But if you have any further questions or if you need additional clarity on that, be happy to answer those questions.
So Darren, obviously our EDC enters into development agreements, loan agreements. I don't know that an abatement would necessarily be that direction.
And the abatement agreements are actually, those are city agreements, not EDC agreements.
Okay, with city agreements. And so, so even somebody's going to come in and build, X amount of capital or square footage, we're gonna extend a water line or we're gonna extend a sewer line. Those would be forms of obligations as well, correct?
They are, but the ones that you see more common, you see the ED making commitments to go in there, and a lot of times that's stuff that's fronted.
X dollars for jobs, X dollars for
they come in and
jobs and
yeah, they're going to build a building of X value dollars, and if they do that, then the EDC is going to make a commitment upon, for instance, when they get their CO, the EDC will make a commitment toward that. And then also for the creation of jobs. And so that commitment may be over a 7 or 8 year period that they could be eligible for receiving additional funds from the EDC. But again, that is an obligation or a debt that the EDC has taken on. And I think that's where that fits in here under this provision. So,
thank you. That makes perfect sense. I guess, have we, so when we were going to pay all the debt off, our bond counsel said, no, you can't. We asked them again this time. They said, no, you can't. Then we talked to someone that doesn't make money off selling bonds, and they said, oh, yeah, you can. Have we heard back from our bond counsel to reconcile that?
I haven't had a conversation with them. I did speak with them this afternoon, but not later in the afternoon. I did leave a message offering to have that conversation, to go a little bit in a deeper dive with them with respect to their past conclusions based on, especially on what I learned today.
Okay. I'd be interested to see that once it comes out. But based on that, I know on slide 15 it says revised forecast. So do we need to take any additional action or give staff direction to remove the 4.7 out of the budget that was presented?
I think just a kind of consensus that that's the direction we want to head in, and we'll make those modifications.
All right.
And then we can have the board consider it at their meeting.
Yeah. I'd be interested to know what the board thinks about the changing legal opinion too.
we can camp out on that a little bit if anybody wants to weigh in on it.
I'd be in support of that.
Okay.
I'll be in support.
I would agree.
Yeah, I would be in support. Just to follow up, because we kind of moved fast, and back then, I contested that we had to hold debt back then, but here we are now. But also back then, what I was saying is, we worked really hard to get that paid off, and what it has done is it's built a big balance in the EDC fund, and what that does is that puts a target on that money to solve our other issues. And I would say the EDCs are already doing the 25%. I don't think I would want to see them or have to label them to do the extra 5% or put it in writing. They're already doing it. I think that's a decision for Matt and his board members, and I think they do a good job, and I support Matt. I mean, although after 6 years he still can't say my last name right, but aside from that, I think that's a decision for them.
All right, carry on.
I guess if you go to slide 24, there's a statement here, funding of the benefit. Is this referencing, if we go to the rule of 80, that it's kind of revenue neutral, or?
Yes, if you go into the rule of 80, the difference would be 2 to 1 when you look at step 10 of an officer comparison into step 1 of an officer.
Okay. Then in terms of building consensus, I'm fine going with the rule of 80. I think it's a good benefit to those officers and all staff that qualify. And if it's net neutral, I think it also gives some upward mobility for some of the younger officers that may have the ability to move up even quicker. So I guess I'll stop there and see.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's camp out. I did have a question on this, and I know our number of eligible jumped quite a bit. That doesn't necessarily mean that all will take it and those types of things. So I'm just going to ask, is there any thoughts on the number that might actually take?
Since we've inducted this benefit, we've only averaged 3 retirees per year in the last 5 years. And we've had quite a bit of folks who were actually eligible, but some people just like working. And if they want to stay here, I'm happy for them. It's important that we retain key knowledge so that we keep going as an organization.
Yeah, it's just kind of hard to know where that number might land, but I agree. I think it's a good benefit. It's and one that actually I think will help attract. So,
I think one of the things is when people know they're ready to retire and they can't, then then what? So, and if they are eligible to take this but they're not ready to retire, we obviously want to keep them and continue to use their knowledge and skills.
Anybody have any thoughts on that as consensus?
I'd support it.
I guess if we did give consensus at some point in the future, if it did get out of control, I guess it could be reined back in by a future council. Would that be a fair assessment?
Subject to an ordinance, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Any more?
In slide 26, I guess a question on this. That last bullet point, retirees cannot temporarily suspend their coverage. I thought I read that wrong, so I had to read it a few times. So we have a retiree that we're paying medical insurance. They get an offer of a full-time employment somewhere. And once they take it, they can't come back?
That's correct.
Okay. What's the thought on that?
The thought on that is that if you're retiring early, realistically, someone's leaving at 55, they have many more years of experience to actually contribute and work. And so if they're going to leave and go somewhere else and take advantage of their benefits, it behooves us to allow them to make the decision to move forward, because as employees age, it also impacts our claims we have to pay in terms of benefits. So if they decide to move off and transition into full-time employment elsewhere, we will honor that request moving forward. And that's pretty much where we stand right now with our current practice at this very moment. It's not changing anything whatsoever. It's just providing clarity when we make the adoption with regards to the ordinance.
I think, part of that is that we look at it as a retirement benefit, not a termination or a, voluntary termination benefit, that you continue on even if you have plans to go to work elsewhere and things like that.
All right. Thank Thank you. And last, if you'll go up to slide 7. And this is what the PPOA discussed during public comment last week. I guess their point was we're average now. This or this proposed increase brings us up to average, and then as soon as everybody else adopts, then we're sliding back down in the big scheme of things. So I guess the question is the numbers where we calculate to get to average, is that using, are we looking at any 2025 proposals from neighboring cities? Or
Sure. So 2 of the cities actually had already enacted their 2025. In that memo, we actually had an asterisk, but we didn't say what the asterisk was. That's what that was supposed to be. We're updating that. So there's 2 of them. One of those we've been told may have another increase coming sometime later again in 2025, but we gathered the latest information we have that's actually been enacted, and then, until we see the others, we don't know where those are going to land. So that's the basis of the recommendation.
okay. If we could put that in the next go round, just so we can look at those numbers. I hear what you're saying on kind of the all-in package, but at the end of the day, if we could find, I don't know that we can find the 2%, but if we can get at least another bump, or if it has to wait till mid-year, because we're doing this every year, playing catch up.
And I think that's maybe where, from a strategic standpoint, we can look at this as we go into that strategic session of where do we want to shoot for? If it's not shoot for that average, what is it we want to shoot for? And then we've got that target as we build future budgets to go there.
Can't help but unintended. I mean, we hope our police shoot above average, so I would hope that we would try to shoot for them a little bit above.
Use the wrong word, sorry.
That's all I had, Mayor.
All right, good deal. Who's up next? Any other questions, comments? Looking good. We'll move on. Oh, you got one? Brown.
Yeah, in the and feel free to tell me we're fixing to get to that if I'm getting ahead of myself. In the budget discussion 1 memo that you sent out, I know it's not part of this presentation. There was a question here about, I have 2 questions. There was a question here about PEG funds. I don't know what that is. Can you help me understand that and why that account is carrying?
Sure. So those are dollars that come through franchise fees for cable and what's that? Yeah, just cable. Sorry, and it goes to support capital expenditures for our governmental television station. PEG is.
It's Public Information, Education, and Government. So they're the public access channels that we have through cable subscriptions. The cable companies give us those channels to publish content, to broadcast our meetings, to have information relevant to the community. And the franchise fee that we collect off of cable subscriptions is the funding source that allows us to maintain that channel by buying camera equipment, setting up studios, different things like that.
Okay, so it's a pretty narrowly limited amount or very restricted fund.
Yeah, it's restricted to capital expenditures that support the PEG channel.
Okay, so is it just going to continue to build and build and build, or we have a long-term plan that?
We have done things to support that. Such, we've got the studio van, or what do you call it? the van.
Yeah, so you'll see an ebb and flow, and you'll see consistent revenues coming in because we collect those franchise fees on an annual basis. But our expenditures ebb and flow depending on need. So our mobile production van was one large expenditure 2 years ago. Last year we did the first phase of the train depot, so that's a large studio for us to use. So we always look for opportunities to ease the general fund where we can when it comes to camera equipment or space that qualifies for that. But it is a very, very specific area where we can use those funds.
Okay. And the reason I bring that up is to Tony's point. I mean, and also to Chad's, I'm not looking to micromanage the budget either, but I am looking to find opportunities, if we can, to improve our compensation to our public safety. So that's why I was asking those questions, because it seems like a fund that just kind of rocks along. So I like that you say, we try to find ways to ease the general fund, because we can ease the general fund, then maybe we can put things in. Another question. Also a question I had, the part of the proposal is purchasing 8 take-home vehicles for law enforcement, correct?
That's correct.
Can-
We're about 18, I think, shy on our take-home policy, and so that's going to make a big dent in that, is to bring us closer to what our policy says.
Okay. So when you talk about overall benefits for an individual officer, having a take-home vehicle would be part of that calculus, wouldn't it? Or what's the, I guess, thought process and logic behind that program?
I think a lot of what's behind that is having the marked vehicles out in the community, and then those that job function requires them to respond directly to a scene, things like that. That's some of the unmarked. So that's some of the reason behind those.
And those are funded out of the motor pool fund.
Yes.
That would be another area that if we backed off of that, it wouldn't change the general fund at all.
That's correct. We're using dollars that are already in the motor pool fund balance to be able to do that.
Okay. It's really difficult to find money in this budget.
It's tight.
I'm trying.
Yep.
Well, they all go to somewhere that's earmarked and have to stay there.
Yep. All right, Trent, I think we're ready to move on.
All right. Thank you. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to Victor. He's going to walk us through the internal service funds as well as the special revenue funds, some of the highlights in those areas.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We'll start with the Risk Management Fund, which essentially is our insurance fund, recording the insurance premiums and the deductibles. You'll notice that the fund balance is decreasing. That's a measure of the increase in insurance premia over the last couple of years, but it's still reasonably healthy, but it's something just to keep an eye on going forward. The next is the Health Claims Fund. So this is relating to our medical insurance. Again, it's been under a little bit of pressure this last year, but still maintaining a healthy fund balance at 3.4 million, so that's within the fund policy. So motor pool, we've just been talking about it. Quite a lot in there now. That's 30 vehicle replacements are included in the proposed 2025 budget, which includes new fire apparatus and replacement ambulance and vehicles for the new positions, including the 8 that we just talked about for police. This is the first year that vehicle replacements under the motor pool have been achievable. So we have 5 vehicles and 1 motorcycle that are being purchased from the lease fees. That's the charges to departments for the vehicles they use. You'll see we're still maintaining a healthy fund balance, and we have been aggressive in making use of that within the proposed budget. Facilities fund, actually we found 50 grand to add back in, so that'll leave us with a balance of about 50 grand at the end of the year. We had a duplicate expenditure recorded in 2 years, so we reversed that, and that will leave us really on the margins here. This is still not fully funded. However, it is supporting operating and maintenance expenditures. But that's one really we're going to need to keep an eye on as we go forward. Things are not getting cheaper. And again, the IT fund also, we're kind of at the margins on that, albeit we are doing some good things. We have the cyber risk and intelligence specialist included in the budget. And then a number of other highlights include replacing the municipal court software, some tweaks to the software in EPW, and you'll remember we're increasing the Tough Book. We're replacing a number of those. That's the internal service funds. Moving on to the special revenue funds. That's just a summary of all of them. I'm not going to talk about all of them. You will see some of them are very, very specific with relatively small balances. But you'll see we have, going into 2025, about 11.6 million. We'll bring in revenues of around 7. We're going to spend 9. That will leave us with a fund balance across all funds of a little under 10 at the end of 2025 proposed. So the big one, hotel, motel, occupancy tax. This is the fund that pays for Visit Pearland. And the additions in this year's budget, we've talked about it, the additional staff member to help with implementation of the Cultural Arts Master Plan is included in this. And we've also included an earmarked 600,000 for a yet to be fully fleshed out proposal to invest further in our recreation facilities. That's that 600,000 under capital outlay. Also, just to note that as the work on the Cultural Arts Master Plan unfolds, I would expect to see other proposals to draw down from fund balance for expenditures on the arts, just flagging that for you. Moving on to Drainage Maintenance Fund, we've added in the Drainage Maintenance Supervisor and continuing with the ongoing maintenance program. Good old Tree Trust Fund. So we're estimating that we start out with a little over $1 million. We're going to be drawing down some of that over the year. We're expecting some more payments in, but that is maintaining a healthy balance. And certainly I would be interested in seeing what imaginative uses we could put the Tree Trust Fund to. And then the Park Development Fund, we just talked about it, as Kerry described earlier. It is fairly highly restricted in its uses, and quite frankly, we're going to deplete it almost in its entirety this next year if the budget is proposed and is accepted as proposed and includes the refurbishment of the Southdown Park playground. And PEG, we just talked about. I'll not bore you further with it. Albeit, though, we do intend, again, imaginative is obviously my word of the evening, folks. But we intend to be imaginative about how we can use that. So we'll be looking to see if we can deploy that, again, more aggressively, particularly when it comes to supporting expenditures on our technology infrastructure. Then to the Infrastructure Reinvestment Fund, and this is, again, something we've talked about at length, includes the 1.3 million towards streets, and this is where we will have the new street maintenance crew that's proposed as well in the budget. We referenced the rehabilitation program, and really that's just by way of context. That money, the 4.3 million, is not included in this fund, but it's just to make the point that these two things go hand in hand, the Infrastructure Reinvestment Fund and the rehabilitation program in the CIP. Which takes us to the CIP.
Thank you, Victor. So the next several slides summarize the capital improvement program budget. We presented the full 5-year CIP at the June 24th CIP workshop series. So we're not planning on a full-blown presentation of it. But just put context around it, the 5-year CIP is a planning document that includes projects in drainage, parks, facilities, roadways, water, and wastewater for the next 5 years. These projects are from voter-approved bond programs. They're also determined from our master plans, our strategic plans, and condition assessments to drive what the needs of our community are. So the CIP identifies the year the project is planned for and the funding source. And then the first year of the CIP is adopted as part of our FY25 budget adoption. So a couple of things that happen moving forward with the CIP. At the September 9th meeting, we will have a resolution to adopt the 5-year program. And then that first year of that 5-year program will get adopted as part of the budget process and the budget ordinance on September 9th and September 23rd. So this is really just a quick refresher of what's in the 5-year CIP before you're asked to approve it next month. So jumping in, of course, the large portion of the drainage projects are part of the 2023 bond package, as well as the GLO funding we've secured to support those projects. So this is the list of projects, list of funding sources. So you see the big portion of that is from our bond programs, as well as the other funding sources, which is those GLO dollars. Then we have our facilities projects. So the funded projects in this are mostly Fire Station 7 and then the Hill House Orange Street complexes. And then there are a large number of unfunded potential future bond referendum projects listed here. So as you look at the funding sources here, we've got GO bonds, we've got COs, and then the big portion of it is future potential bond package projects. So those are just from a planning standpoint, identifying needs, but of course won't move forward or won't happen until we go through a process of actually funding those through a bond program or other funds. And then our parks projects, these basically show some trails that we have funded with matching funds, either from the county or the state federal programs. And then also the 2 projects that were in our 2023 bond program, the Hickory Slough project, which now is actually funded by PEDC, and then the Independence Park, the next phase of Independence Park, phase 2 there as well. So then you see the funding sources from the 23 bond program. You see the EDC as a funding source there, as well as the HGAC TIP and other funding sources. Those are matching funds from the county as well as the state and federal programs. And then we move into our streets program. This has prior bond packages, our projects that have federal, state, and county matching dollars, and kind of highlighted by the Smith Ranch Road project, the Hughes Road project, and Macawa. And then we do have a significant number of other projects that we would look at in future bond packages, or if we are able to secure state or federal dollars for those projects. So you see the big chunk of this is potential future bond package with the bulk of the funding coming from GOs from 19 and 23, as well as COs, which we use a lot of the times when we have matching funds for state or federal dollars. And then we also see $8 million in there from EDC as part of that. And then TERS reimbursable debt as well on some of the road projects that we're doing for intersection improvements out in the TERS. Jumping into our water and sewer side of things, with the surface water treatment plant wrapping up, our water project portfolio moving forward mostly consists of line replacements, our transite water line replacement program, water well rehabs, and water tank rehabs for the next several years. Many of the water line replacement projects, those correspond with other projects. So when we go into a neighborhood, we want to take that complete neighborhood approach to revitalization of the infrastructure in those neighborhoods. So when we're doing drainage projects, we look at the condition of the water lines, the wastewater lines, the streets and everything as we go in there. So, there's several of them in here that correspond with drainage and wastewater and projects along those lines, so that we go in one time in that neighborhood, revitalize the infrastructure, disturb the neighborhood one time, and don't have to keep coming back in the neighborhood to do the different projects. Of course, these are all funded by water and sewer COs for the most part. And then our wastewater projects, of course, the big one here, is the Berry Rose Longwood, very large project that we're moving forward with. And then once really that's completed, we're much like the water side of things, we're really kind of following that on with a lot of the rehab type projects. So water and sewers, sanitary sewer rehab projects to address inflow and infiltration, as well as lift station rehabilitation projects as we move through the years. And again, funded mostly with impact fees and water and sewer COs. So with that, we'll pause again and entertain any questions or discussion around the internal service funds, special revenue funds, and CIP.
Okay, same thing. We'll open up for council questions, comments, and if we got any input to seek any consensus on any changes. A lot less questions on some of the consensus building, but good input as well. So I would open for council.
I have one really random question on Victor.
I'll let you do a random question.
Thank you. Victor, on slide 38, what is the demonstration garden?
That is an excellent question, which I will punt to answer if he's here.
Hello. Good evening, everybody. So Vance Wiley, Community Development. My address is here. But so the demonstration garden is behind the recycling center. We're partnering with Keep Pearland Beautiful on that. It's going to have a hardscape, and it's going to demonstrate some of the native habitat that grows in the area. And then in addition, I believe we're going to move the fruit trail over there as well.
Okay. That's what I thought it was. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you, Mayor. I don't know how many of you guys have seen this budget and kind of taken a step back, but what I would ask Trent and your team to do is we've seen the 5-year forecast that the growth continues. And on one of your slides, you wrote, just like a business incurs cost increase and inflation, we also prepare for the downturn. And what I would ask you to go back and show me what a downturn looks like and where we would cut cost. Because the downturn may be coming next year or 2 years, who knows? But when it does, what does that look like for the city? And so far, all I've seen, and maybe I missed it, is a constant uptick on values, on sales tax has been flat. And I am worried that the sales tax, which could be a great portion of our revenue, if it starts ticking down, what does that look like? How does that impact our budget? Where do we make the cuts? So I would ask you and your team to go back and play some rough scenarios of that and bring that back to us. I don't know if anybody else would be interested in that, but.
So, that the midterm forecasting and financial planning, that's, one of our goals that we're in the early stages of working on, so that we've got some better tools moving forward to kind of look at those sort of things. In short order, we feel like our, estimates for growth, they shrink over time, and we've looked at sales tax being very flat this next year. I think, we're looking at a growth of like less than $500,000. So, I think fully stand up what you're asking for is going to probably take a little bit of time, and it's part of something we're already working on that we'll start to concentrate on after we get through this budget process to really look at what does it look like from a, what's the rosy picture, what's the downturn picture, what's what are the things that'll drive those different things, and then how do we manage where we are within those different possibilities.
One more thing, and I don't know, remind me, where's Fire Station 7 at?
So Fire Station 7, we located on Bailey Road, just east of the Rec Center and Auditorium, just west of the water plant there.
I guess, is that the edge of the city limits out there?
It's not exactly edge of the city limits. And then we do also have the Massey Oaks development to the south of there. So it does serve kind of an area that is a hole in our service area between fire stations 2 and 3.
I mean, I would ask if there's an appetite to push this back maybe 1 fiscal year or 2 even until more development comes and hold on to that cash. I just feel like we may be incurring a lot of cash earlier or cost earlier. And I know it's going to take time. I know the reason you guys are going to tell me that, hey, it takes time. But I just feel like at the moment, I think if we can serve that area from a different station, it may be worth just pushing it back maybe 1 or maybe even 2 years.
Yes, I'd like the chief to weigh in on it.
If I can maybe start off with kind of what the timeline is. Yeah. So what we've got in the FY25 budget is to design the station. So that's somewhere 7 to 10%, maybe 12% of the cost of the project. And then that would line us up for being able to build it the following year, occupy it, the next year after that. So that's when we'll really see the operational dollars hit the budget. So if there's some desire to wait and see, what I would recommend, and I'm going to let the chief kind of go through the needs and why that station is scheduled for now, and what our response times are doing, and how we respond from other stations. But I would recommend that we move forward with the design. So the other piece of that is, we're looking for potential grant funds to help with the operating cost. If we get those, we continue to move forward. Even if we don't get those, we can then evaluate, is it the right time to move forward? And we don't have to, wait another year if we pause a year to get the design completed. We got the design in the can, we're ready to go. So, and then maybe Chief, you can weigh in on the needs and where that kind of hole in our service area is.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Epperson. All of this started back during a 2012 city fire station placement study that was council supported, as well as a 2017 Citygate study or standards of cover that talks not only about the staffing within the fire service, fire department, fire and EMS, but also the placement of our future firehouses. All that's predicated on our run volumes, our response times, future growth, and all that's taken into consideration for that. Our response times in the 7th district currently are up over 10.5 minutes. 6 is where Massey Oaks will be located, and that's future Firehouse 6 down there will be on 12.5 minutes currently. I will add that on October 5th of last year, when we had our May Day fire where we almost lost one of our firefighters, that was in future Firehouse 7's district. They would have been there within 2.5 minutes. It took them over 10.5 minutes to respond to that fire scene. That puts our firefighters and our citizens at a tremendous risk, and that's why we look at these locations very seriously for future growth, so that we place them strategically so that we can provide those response times under the 7-minute timeframes that we hope to achieve. And there's a lot of reasons why we do that. So it's like having surgery and taking your pain pills after the pain has gotten there and trying to chase the pain. We don't want to chase the pain. We want to be in a position to mitigate those situations before they arrive and not after they arrive. And I believe we have this strategically placed at the end of the bond program that was just passed. So that gives us as much time in this time frame as possible to put that in place during these parameters. Thank you.
So Trent, that you mentioned Massey Oaks, and there's, I think, 4 developments. Do you know how many, and that kind of being the whole, do you know how many lots are coming online, and roughly of the timing of those compared to the Fire Station 7?
So I'm going to hand that off to maybe answer it, but just kind of to clarify, Fire Station 7, there's another fire station, it's Fire Station 6, that actually is the one down there that would serve that area directly. But initially 2 and I believe 7 would have to respond down there. Maybe Vance, I don't know if Raj can help you out, but we do have a number of platted lots. So as soon as everything, with the recent actions taken, Massey Oaks should be able to start moving forward again. And maybe we can talk about the number of platted lots that are on the ground, not yet built on, and then kind of how many lots are kind of looking a little bit further down the road within the next 2 to 3 years that we would expect if they're successful in that subdivision, moving forward as we expect.
So taking a step back from maybe the number of lots, just to talk about number of units because of the BTR component, that'll be one lot with like 400 units on it. There's 15 to maybe 1,800 lots that will be coming online out there. The original projection by the developer was 200 lots a year. It's kind of what we were forecasting whenever we did the budget numbers over the past few years. Obviously, that didn't come to fruition, but hopefully we'll be seeing those numbers come back. To give an exact number is difficult just because of the number of developers and the infrastructure that's outstanding. But hopefully they get their feet under them, and we're looking at 200 houses a year just from that subdivision alone, or that development alone.
How many are out there now?
Constructed, there's 151 lots out there.
Well, and
homes.
to Mr. Toombs' point, I think the Massey Oaks proper, I'll call it that way, which is known as Massey Oaks, and then a little bit more of the land that's been added, and then there's additional property that's being added as well. Maybe not added to Massey Oaks, but it's added to the area. So I think it's safe to say that 1,100-ish acres that's all of County Road 100 from Veterans all the way to the western edge of Massey Oaks is probably 1,100 or so acres. You're going to have every bit of 3,000 to 3,500 units, give or take, in that area. I think that's the
Darren, I think the pro rata forecast for the pro rata share of the northern Harkey sewer line was what, like 4,200 approximately is the number they were using for the tying on to the Harkey pro rata share.
You're referring to the service area?
The service area.
Or that for the gravity line?
Yes. Was it about 4,200 lots?
I don't remember, but it's somewhere in that ballpark.
Right, and then that didn't include the area to the west near the 99 area. So you're looking at possibly, if we use those 4,200 lots, you're looking at possibly maybe another 1,000 down there.
I do want to make clear that a lot of those lots, including that service area, are currently they're in the county that is not in the city limits, but it's still in that service area, and those are acreage type lots that are developed with single family in that area.
Okay, because I think the forecast I saw of just the lots alone were in that service area were around 3,000 or 3,500 were like what he was saying. And if I'm not mistaken, most of them are either in planning or permitted.
everything but probably the far eastern 300 acres.
Yeah. So I guess the whole long way of getting here is that I think Fire Station 7 is going to come online if we're just designing and then constructing right about the same time a lot of those lots hit the ground.
I think the further question is, well, then what's the timing of Fire Station 6 at some point? Because Fire Station 6 has I think there's a platted area in, I guess what Beezer now is taking down of that track is a public safety
Mayor,
site.
if I jump in there, the number of lots in Massey Oaks hasn't changed since last year when we on September 11. So the total number of lots or the subdivision that's constructed is 300 from Massey Oaks itself. And I haven't updated the new lots, but the way that we presented for the Massey Oaks, loop tracks, and ordinary track, the total number of lots were 1472. So that exclude McKeever and the future proposed subdivision on the east side of McKeever or Magnolia Creek. That's the future one that we don't know, but 1472, 1500 is the ballpark number in that area. That includes loop track and the multi lot rental property too. So.
Yeah, and I'm speculating the other tracks, the other property that hasn't really come in, and we're not considering into those numbers. You're going to get upwards of 3,000 to 3,500, and I'm going on a density number of somewhere between 3 and 3.5. At 1,000 acres, there's your number. So but it's to the point. 7's going to come online sooner rather than later. Probably will be forced to just by the number of sheer homes down there over the next 3 years. And that's the 3-year timing is kind of what we're talking about anyway, by the time it would come online. And I think it would be important to know that because equipment, especially trucks, have to be, you don't just buy one the day we open. So we've got to have those planned out to be there ready when the station's ready.
Yeah, and also, Darren, I know you mentioned that some of those forecasted lots are in that 4,200 was also in the county, but that section of county is in our number 4 ESD. Sorry, and so we service those as well. Correct.
Yes, anything in ESD4 that's in our ETJ, those are areas that we do provide services to via contract.
Questions, comments? Ms. Kate?
I do understand what Member Patel is saying about we're going through the words inflation, and do the departments in the city take that into consideration? Do y'all talk about that, like when they're making their budget? Looking at printing costs, and then there's also a line item that says copy costs. I mean, what's the difference there? They're together. They're over $500,000. Just things like that. Are there ways we can cut costs just on stuff like that across departments? I know that seems silly, but just in.
So I think, the departments do weigh in, how is inflation impacting the departments? If we purchase materials, chemicals, supplies, and those sort of things, when they're going through their budgets, they're looking at, are we in a new contract? Have we bid this out? How are those new costs impacting our budget? Those are taken into account. I think I don't know if our big printing budget, is that the calendar but it doesn't seem like it's that big of a number.
No, the calendar is roughly $50,000 for printing. It goes to every household. That is one really good example where inflation has had an impact. So several years ago, we actually migrated from glossy pages to non-gloss to regular printer paper. So we're going with thinner stock and smaller sizes. So if you compare the calendar we do now to 3 years ago, it's actually 2 inches shorter on one side and an inch shorter on the long edge of it. So we do look at those types of things to try to maximize the effectiveness of the budget that we have.
If I can weigh in, so I think the printer cost and copy costs are related to our copy lease program. So those are for the devices that are throughout the city by department and the cost of the actual copies.
Thank you for clearing that up.
Going back to the memo that you sent us earlier under the general fund, there's a few different line items that I was just curious about. Professional development certifications and licenses and professional development conference and seminars combined, that's just under 1.2 million. So I was just kind of curious, what is the certification and licenses? Is that what we would commonly refer to as like continuing education kind of things, maintaining specialties for different members of the staff?
Correct. So typically those are, yes, the continuing education requirements for any certifications required to do those their positions. Also continuing education just generally. So we're keeping up with the trends. We're understanding, what are the new things coming down the line that we need to be aware of or be preparing for, and just generally making sure we have a good, well-educated and prepared for the future workforce. We did a pretty extensive analysis of that probably 2 to 3 budgets ago. Kind of broke that down between public safety and the rest of that, and a lot of that, it does go into what's required to keep folks trained and prepared and ready for their jobs from a emergency management or a public safety standpoint, as well as in the areas where we've got to have people licensed to operate water, wastewater, those sort of things as well.
So that would be on the certifications and licenses side, right?
Yes.
Okay, which is around 430. The conferences and seminars, that's different.
That's different. That's actually, traveling to conferences and seminars, but they kind of go hand in hand because a lot of those certifications require continuing education, credits and those sort of things, and we get a lot of those credits from our seminars and
You have to go to the
conferences.
seminars to get the certifications.
A lot of the times to get the continuation education credits, and then also, like I said, that's where we try to keep our staff aware of the current trends, the different things that we're going to have to deal with in the future, and just make sure we're there where we need to be as we move forward. I won't say we're not on the bleeding edge, but trying to be on the cutting edge of being efficient and from a technology standpoint as well. There's a lot of things there.
Also on that same memo, I know you guys, there's the 2.6 million for miscellaneous contractual services, and y'all broke that down a little bit. Can you tell me what HR comp and class is, and then I have one other question.
Sure. So as we talked about a little bit in tonight's presentation, that we did a very extensive survey for PD and fire with this year's class and compensation, and that's what's driving the numbers behind that. For the rest of our organization, we did some update of numbers, but that would look to do that deeper dive to make sure we're keeping up in those areas as well as we are on the public safety areas.
So that 100,000 in there, that's basically studies or comp and class.
It's to bring on somebody to help us analyze the data and look at that for the rest of the organization.
Okay, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we're not there yet, but we're working on rolling. Maybe I'm completely wrong and I bonked my head, but we're working on rolling fire dispatch into our overall dispatch system.
So the FY24 budget included a study to basically look at the path forward to do that. So it's looking at not just how do you structure it, what's the personnel you need, but what's the equipment, what's the space you need, and those sort of things. And that kicked off recently. And what's the timeline?
As a matter of fact, during this meeting, I got the draft, the initial draft from Matrix Consulting, and so we're working on getting that developed and reviewed and back to them with updates and corrections. So that's basically the phase that we're at with that. And, we're hoping that hopefully by mid-year we can identify if there's any capital costs that we need that we can acquire if we're going to move in that direction, and determine if we need additional staff to provide those services in-house. The cost that we pay e-com currently is, basically that will be a cost that we don't incur going forward, but we will use to offset some of the cost of implementing this plan.
So that you just got to ultimately into my question. There's 384,000 is contracted fire dispatch services. That's what we're paying now. So
yes, sir.
Some of that would be used to make the transition internally, but there could be some potential savings there by moving this in-house.
Just to set
that
expectations, I would say it's unlikely there'll be any savings by going to in-house dispatching. I think the benefit there is the time savings in response times by not having to dispatch. Because the calls come into our dispatch center, they're routed to e-com. E-com then dispatches fire, and then a lot of times our dispatchers have to stay on there with them because you are dispatching both fire and police to many of the incidents at the same time. So bringing that in-house would eliminate a lot of that, bring some of those response times down, but it comes at a cost. The contracted services are fairly cost effective, and that's why the city chose to go that direction, several years ago as we were building our fire department.
I appreciate it.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Clint has tried every dollar. Can't find it. No. Want to wrap up anything, Trent?
Sure. So we do have a few more slides here. Victor's going to cover the fee changes.
Oh, that's right.
And then we'll jump into, we had decision points, but I think we may have touched on all those, and then we'll just conclude things.
Thank you, Mayor. Very, very quickly, just to run through the proposed fee changes, and let me preface that by saying these are essentially pass-through costs. So where costs have increased under contract, we then are required to recover those by passing those on to end users. So that's what all of these reflect. That's for the general fund. And moving to the enterprise fund, similarly, these relate to contractual increases. Those are all included in the proposed budget. Solid waste. Yeah, and that's, yes, the solid waste increases ties back to CPI. These are fees which actually were accidentally missed out of the previous fee schedule. So they are costs that are being incurred that should be passed on, and now they will be. That's all I have.
Okay, any questions on the fees or the new fees being proposed or presented?
Just on the slide 64, the garbage fee, which is on the, it's not much, but it's just another shot to our water bill.
So in our contract, basically, this is tied back to a solid waste or garbage disposal CPI index. And so that's what this contract increases by annually.
78 cents, I think. Yeah. But still, it's an increase. Mr. Koza?
Yes, Mayor. Trent, on slide 62, and it goes through all the different size meters. It says fee assessed when meter and/or endpoint is damaged and must be replaced. What exactly was that? Any reason? Because I know we've had some issues where we've had some errant meters.
So this typically, my understanding is, doesn't get assessed, unless there's, been clear purposeful damage done to that, or somebody's, cut the wires one time, we've gone out and replaced it, and it happens again. And from going from the old fee to the new fee, it's just updating that to our current contractual cost for doing that.
I was more worried with the
why. Yes, sir.
Well, yeah, the justification.
Yes.
To make sure that if we had an issue that wasn't being assessed as far as that goes. All right, thank you.
That was a question I had on these slides. You hit mine. So any other questions, comments? And I think on the park fees, these are just user fees you're using. This is the cost increase for different, getting a park ready, getting a facility ready. It's a charge to the user that's renting the facility. All right.
Right. So, as the mayor mentioned in his opening remarks, this is a point where changes can and should be considered and made part of the budget process. And what we aim for moving forward is we've had great discussions around the budget, lots of input and consensus. And like the mayor mentioned, as we showed last week, changes in math during the meetings is spotty at best. Sometimes we have to back up and do them again, but we appreciate all the input tonight. I think the decision points we had tonight, we got clear direction already on retiree medical benefits, moving to the rule of 80. Water and sewer rates want to see a 7%, and we can provide that. And EDC debt, we would not issue any in FY25. So just want to make sure, do we have any other input or questions tonight? And we've got the budget discussion 3 built into next week's regular meeting. So just want to make sure there is a desire to bring back and have that final discussion or touch base, or we can provide it all in a memo this week. And just wanted to see where we are.
The only question, Trent, that there's a lot of questions about, and I want to make sure the members, either they were satisfied or do we still have more, thoughts on street repair maintenance? I know that we kind of started off our discussion with that, and there was some consensus to make sure that we do. I know, at least for me, what we're doing in street repair and maintenance, that we showed here is satisfying, at least the short term, where we're going to be hitting it a lot in this coming year. but it looks like also we've got some out years already covered. So I think the more we can get in depth, whether that's ready for prime time next week at the council meeting or not for that one item, we can see it, hear it,
Sure.
here, just to make sure that we're good with what's being proposed moving forward.
Sure. I think we may have a couple of questions from tonight. I know we do have some written questions as well. So the plan is we'll publish a memo out this Thursday answering all those questions. And then we'll just go ahead and have that discussion item on the agenda next week, and we can take advantage of that to kind of wrap those loose ends up and move forward. So just touching base on the schedule moving forward. Before I do that, I want to thank all of our staff that's here tonight. Again, all of our directors, their budget staffs, really did a great job putting a good, tight, strong budget together this year. So I want to say thanks to everybody. Our budget staff back there, can y'all wave? That's Rachel's. They don't want to be recognized, but I'm going to do it anyway. They do incredible work, and thank you for bearing with Victor and myself tonight, and we'll have Rachel back moving forward. But August 26th, budget discussion number 3, and then September 9th, our budget public hearing. We'll have on that night, I believe, also the resolution adopting the 5-year CIP, first reading of budget FY25, first reading of the tax rate, first reading of the non-development fees. Come back on the 23rd with our public hearing for the tax rate, and then the second reading of all the things, and then we will wrap things up and be ready to kick off Happy New Year, October 1st. So appreciate the council's input and discussion throughout this process, and look forward to getting things to you this week and having that final discussion next week. Thank you.
Sounds good. And I want to echo thank you to everybody, staff, for being here tonight and during our conversations. Hopefully it was entertaining enough to hold you in place tonight. Same thing with the budget folks. I know the iterations can be a lot sometimes, but appreciate the work and the effort in putting it all together. With that, we're going to move to adjournment of this workshop at 8:34. Stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. State flag. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state